Mr. President, Honorable Ministers, Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. The government of St. Kitts and Nevis has embarked on a mission to transform our federation into a sustainable island state by fully embracing the 2030 Agenda for the Sustainable Development Goals as our guiding light. On the eve of our 40th anniversary of independence, we remain committed to leave no one behind. I will highlight our progress and challenges in the implementation of SDGs 6, 7, 9, 11, and 17, and with the hope of exciting our development partners to further support St. Kitts and Nevis with a population of just 50,000 with access to concessionary resources and finances to achieve full SDG implementation. SDG 6, clean water and sanitation. St. Kitts and Nevis has 99% access to clean and safe water and 87% access to sanitation services. However, our country is amongst the most water-scarce countries globally. Water demand already exceeds supply by 27% due to expanding social and economic infrastructure and, importantly, decreasing annual precipitation with about 20% decrease over the last 10 years and 40% decrease so far this year alone, resulting in unavoidable water rationing. Further, our country continues to grapple with increasing saltwater contamination of groundwater supplies due to sea level rise and decreasing aquifer recharge. Desalination is identified as a long-term solution, and work has commenced towards the installation of our first publicly owned desalination plant donated by the United Arab Emirates. Further, ongoing partnerships with domestic and international investors are expected to yield an increase in desalinated water from 150,000 to 400,000 gallons per day, 2% to 5.7% of supply within a few weeks, and 2 million gallons per day, 29% of supply within 8 months. Groundwater exploration continues with new well drillings to supply an additional 500 to 800,000 gallons per day to underserved communities in the near term. On Nevis, the Caribbean Development Bank, CDB, has sponsored a USD 11 million water enhancement project, resulting in substantially enhanced water storage and distribution capacity. Further, the 2021 passage of the Nevis Physical Planning and Development Control Regulations stipulates that buildings for human habitation must have a rainwater catchment and storage facility. A similar exercise is underway for St. Kitts, with the 2023 update of the National Physical Development Plan, including the greening of the building codes. SDG 7, affordable and clean energy. We are pleased to report that access to electricity increased from 93.5% in 2001 to 100% in 2017. However, we presently rely heavily on fossil fuels, leaving our country vulnerable to oil price fluctuations that directly impact electricity costs. Consequently, our government is actively pursuing transition to wind, solar, and geothermal energy. In October 2022, we solidified a partnership with the CDB with the approval of a contingency grant of US 17 million to develop a geothermal power plant on Nevis by 2025 with a capacity of 10 megawatts, more than enough to meet the domestic electricity demand on Nevis. Consequently, interconnection of the electrical grids of both islands is now imperative. Similarly, on St. Kitts, we intend to propel our renewable energy sources, led by solar development, to 30% of supply by 2025, with further potential to increase to 60% by 2027, with our ultimate goal of 100% renewable sources by 2030. In addition, our pledge to reduce CO2 emissions will in part be achieved through the phased electrification of our public vehicle fleet while incentivizing electrification of private vehicles. Importantly, as we transition, we will need international support to modernize our aged fixed capacity generators by using transitionary fuels and methods to have redundancies during our shift to renewables. SDG 9, Industry, Innovation and Infrastructure. Over 95% of the population has access to electricity, potable water, sanitation services, and shelter. In addition, St. Kitts and Nevis is ranked 74th globally per capita in roadways, with recent government approval for the development of an additional 11 kilometers of new roads in this calendar year alone. Manufacturing, on the other hand, has declined over the last 10 years due to high energy costs, intense market competition with low-cost producing countries, and the severe impacts of COVID-19. Consequently, we are introducing a revised manufacturing strategy which targets the establishment of, among others, a factory to build solar panels to facilitate low-cost energy-saving options while providing employment for those displaced from the manufacturing sector in recent years. In ICT, St. Kitts and Nevis has been a leader. In 2017, the ICT Development Index ranked the Federation 37th among 176 countries, the highest in the OECS and 4th in Latin America and the Caribbean. Our country has a high mobile penetration at 137%, and our local telecommunication service providers are undertaking work to increase internet speeds by up to 50% with minimal cost increase for consumers, while improving resilience of telecommunications infrastructure. The goal is 1 gigabit minimum by 2030. Emphasis is now placed on becoming a leading digital society, attracting talent and technology companies, and developing creative industries such as film, sports, and entertainment. The pandemic has led to an increase in online and digital services such as payment of taxes, accessing social services and delivery services, and an emergence of new digital entrepreneurs. At present, a digital transformation unit is being established to accelerate implementation of our whole-of-government digital transformation strategy. SDG 11, Sustainable Cities and Communities. Climate change poses an existential threat to St. Kitts and Nevis, being the smallest independent state in the Western Hemisphere. As a small, vulnerable, open economy island state, we are identified among the world's top 60 countries exposed to risk of mortality from 2 or more hazards, with an estimated 40% of the population considered at risk. Additionally, St. Kitts and Nevis is among the top 40 countries with significant economic risks from 2 or more hazards, with a GDP risk estimated at 65%. The reality is that many urban dwellings are not yet resilient to hazards, and there are still citizens who cannot afford proper housing. The government is therefore focused on making housing more accessible by specifically creating access to affordable housing for public servants, in addition to the over 2,300 social and low-income housing units that have been distributed across both islands. In addition to duty-free concessions for first-time homeowners, a developer has been approved to finance and deliver 2,400 affordable smart homes over the next 4 years. SDG 17 partnerships for the goals. Implementation of the SDGs is primarily resourced by the government with modest support from international development and bilateral partners. Over the last decade, on average, 90% of the national budget was funded from domestic resources. The remaining 10% was provided through external funding in the form of loans and grants. Securing adequate financial resources to implement national priorities and achieve the SDGs remain a major challenge, particularly given St. Kitts and Nevis's misleading classification as a high-income country. Strategic partnerships will have to be our pathway to SDG success. We are doing our part, but it is evident that public funds are inadequate to sustain our holistic plan to accelerate SDG implementation and achieve a sustainable island state. It is imperative that the international community explore new and innovative financing mechanisms informed by a multidimensional vulnerability index and urgently shift resources to where they are most needed. I now invite you to view a video on SKN's SDG progress.
St. Kitts and Nevis has made significant strides in implementing the 2030 Agenda for sustainable development. Our development initiatives over the past 2 decades have targeted accelerating economic growth with a focus on employment, resulting in a fall in the levels of poverty, improved social services, and expanded social protection for poor and vulnerable households. However, the pandemic caused massive disruption to people's lives and affected the implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals in areas such as poverty reduction, good health care, quality education, decent work, and economic growth. St. Kitts and Nevis's new National Development Planning Framework, which guides the country's development planning for the next 15 years, is well aligned with the Sustainable Development Goals and the government's vision for the country to become a sustainable island state. People and prosperity. St. Kitts and Nevis's economy bounced back positively from the pandemic. Tourism and its ancillary sectors have rebounded sharply, contributing to real GDP growth of 9% in 2022, after contracting 14.5% in 2020 and 0.9% in 2021. The government is resolute in its pursuit of initiatives to diversify the economy, targeting sustainable agriculture and food security through the establishment of environmentally friendly green villages, regenerative tourism focused on building resilience and the sustainable use of our resources, and developing the green, blue, and orange economies. We have intensified our transition to renewable energy through the integration of solar power, and we are well on our way to achieve geothermal energy production on Nevis by 2025. Lessons learned during the pandemic highlighted the importance of social protection in post-pandemic recovery, including strengthening household resilience and skills relevant to the emergent labor market. The government's top priorities are improving health and well-being, building social cohesion, and protecting the most vulnerable, mainstreaming gender, youth, and persons with disabilities across all policies and initiatives, and improving the access to affordable education. Planet. Despite our minuscule contribution to global carbon dioxide emissions, St. Kitts and Nevis is extremely vulnerable to climate change phenomena. Several cyclones and hurricanes have affected our country since 1950. With about 15.2% of the population living in low-lying coastal zones, the threat of storm surge and sea level rise is real. Drought has been identified as a critical hazard, making water scarcity a significant challenge. Given the centrality of groundwater sources to the national water supply, protecting this resource and improving water conservation are crucial. To increase and diversify water production capacity, St. Kitts and Nevis will require international support to introduce new technologies and methods, including desalination, in the short term. St. Kitts and Nevis remains committed to environmental sustainability and resilience. As a signatory to several climate change-related international agreements, we have integrated climate change mitigation and adaptation into our development planning. Our updated, nationally determined contributions under the Paris Agreement pledges an ambitious 61% reduction in carbon dioxide emissions by 2030 and sets out a wide-ranging program for climate change adaptation, for which improved access to climate finance will be pivotal. Peace and partnership. The safety and security of the residents of St. Kitts and Nevis continues to be top priority. Over the past 10 years, major crimes have declined significantly through a comprehensive crime management strategy, including the build-out of social intervention and rehabilitation programs for deeper impact, along with the modernization of security infrastructure and reform of the judicial system. We are proud of the work done to establish a modern and far-reaching good governance framework with a focus on anti-corruption, integrity in public life, and freedom of information. Both domestic and external partnerships have played a catalytic role for St. Kitts and Nevis to successfully advance on the SDGs. However, accelerating SDG implementation in line with our Sustainable Island State agenda will require even more strategic and impactful partnerships. The government of St. Kitts and Nevis is committed to working hand in hand with our private sector, civil society, and regional and international partners to fully integrate the SDGs into our medium-term development planning. With this renewed collective ambition and concerted effort, St. Kitts and Nevis commits to leave no one behind.
Thank you.